Welcome back everybody to our To-Do app tutorial. So in this tutorial we're building out a To-Do app. In the previous sessions we've given our To-Do app the functionality to get and display a list of possible to-dos, to give the user the option to add a new to-do and press the Add To-Do button to add it to that list, and the option to delete any of the to-dos that are added to this list. In this tutorial, what we're going to do is we're going to be giving the user the option to edit a particular to-do. The edit bit of functionality in any application is quite widely used. So if you think about any time your users might want to update, let's say, a username, a password, their email address, if they want to update their banking information, or even if they just want to update, like a social media post, they're going to be using this update functionality. So it's quite an important one. Here just before we start, we're just going to restyle this very slightly. So I'm just going to set each of these to 6 and 6. And then what you can do is you can pick the row and you can justify the content to the center of that row. If you want to style as well the button quickly, we're just going to give this a very quick color. So we're going to pick a background color for this. I'm just going to give it purple, but you can enter a color that you like in there. And yeah, so that's just to restyle the application slightly. So I'm just going to save that on this page. And then the same way that we created the functionality to delete or to get, add, get records from, or add a to-do or to delete a to-do or to get the list of to-dos, we need to first of all start off by creating an endpoint in order to update our to-do. So if we go over to the endpoints tab here, you can press the new endpoint up here, and then we're going to give this endpoint a name. So we're going to call it edit a to-do. We're going to give it a path, call it v1 edit to-do, and then give it the extension ID in curly braces. This ID is going to be the ID of the value that we go to look up. So the actual to-do, that we go to look up. So when we're going to edit a to-do, our user is going to click a button and send some information back for a new to-do, to edit an existing to-do. The to-do that's going to be edited is going to be the one that contains the ID or the ID that's contained within our path here. So that's exactly the same as it was for the delete event that we set up in the previous tutorial. On the request method, we use delete to delete, get to get the records, post in order to create a new to-do. But here we want to edit a to-do, so we're going to use the put request method. Now, when the user wants to edit a particular to-do, what they're going to do is they're going to have to type in a bit of text, and they're going to press a button which is going to submit that update to the back end of our system. That information is going to arrive at our endpoint, and it's going to arrive as a body variable. So the same way that we did when we created a new to-do, we're going to set the body variable here to our custom model that we created in part 2 of this series, and we're going to give this a label. So this is going to be to-do edit info, just the edit information for a particular to-do. Copy that across here and set that to required. On the custom model, then we're going to select a single to-do and press the save button over here. The final thing that we need to do in this setup is we need to actually set this ID somewhere. So in order to do that, that's this path variable down here. So we're going to add in a path variable, which is going to be a number. We need to call it ID. And then down here, we need to set that to required. So it's exactly the same as we did for the delete endpoint that we set up before. Just a quick reminder that ID has to equal exactly the same spelling and capitalization of the ID which is in the curly braces of the path up here. So once you've done that, you can just press the save button over here, and that's going to save down that endpoint. The next thing that we need to do is we need to go over to our action tab, and we need to create a new action which is going to be associated with that that edit to do endpoint. So we're going to create a new action, give it a name, call it edit to do, like so, and press the save button over here. So that's going to then create a new action. It's got a name, edit to do. It's got a trigger. The trigger is going to be the edit to do endpoint. Now, the same way that we set up for the delete action, what we needed to do is we needed to actually go and look up the record that we wanted to delete. And we needed to then look that up within the action so that we could run the delete command on it. In this case, what we're doing is we're going to be editing a particular action, a particular to-do. So we're going to go and look up the ID number 13 or the ID of the to-do that we want to edit. And we're going to run the edit command on that. So the same way that we did for the delete, we're going to do that here. We're going to go look up that particular row of data in our database. So we're going to pick the kind here to model, and we're going to say this is a single to-do to edit. Same name, set to basic, and then we're going to pick the model to-dos. We're going to set the where clause up. So to look for the ID, we're going to look up this single to-do to edit. We're going to look it up where the ID of this record is equal to the ID that's passed in from our endpoint. So that's the ID that comes in our path variable. Press the save button and save here, and that's configured the first half of our action. The next thing we need to do is we need to actually run the update event, and we add that update event to the as an event in our actions and events graph by pressing the plus button. We're going to pick from here the set the kind of our event to update. We're going to then take the object that we want to update. The object that we want to update is the object that we just looked up. So that's a single to do to edit. So just to be really explicit, if I save that and click on the background over here, that's this single to do to edit, which is the one we looked up with the ID that was passed in from our endpoint. So we've got that update command here ready to run on this particular object, but we now need to say what fields or what items within that object we actually want to update. So the bit we want to update is the name field, and we want to assign a value to it. That value is going to be the information that comes in from our endpoint. So that will be our body variable, which is the name field here. So that's when the user's actually typing in the front end of the system. They're submitting their edit to the back end, and here we're running that update to say that the name here by Fish and Chips is going to update to contain whatever information is inside this to do edit info .name field here. So I'm going to press the save button there and the save button down here, and then that whole thing is done. So what we can do to test that is we can come up and we can generate the code. So let's call this test update backend code, and we can press the generate button here. So that's now going to generate the underlying source code for this particular configuration. While that's generating, we can come over to our endpoint. And what we're going to do is we're going to force this endpoint to run from up here in the top right hand corner of the screen. When we run it, we're going to be looking for a record with ID number 13, and we're going to be changing the name of this record, of this particular to-do. So here on my endpoints page, I'm going to press the run button up here. I'm going to pick the ID 13, so I'm going to look up the particular record number 13, and I'm going to change the name field here to buy a burger and chips, like that, and then press the run button here. Now, if you set everything up correctly, what you'll get back here is a code 200 message, which means that this command is successfully executed. We don't get any information back because we're just updating. We're not getting any information in this case. But what I can do is I can come up to the tables tab and I can refresh my application and we can see here if this number 13 record has updated. Yes, so here we've got this number 13. We can see that to do here name has updated to buy a burger and chips. So that means our update event is working correctly on the back end of our system. So the final bit in our process then, now we've built the back end, the final portion is to build the front end. of our system, the same as we did before for the delete function and to get all the to-dos and also to add the to-dos. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to the workflow tab. I'm going to set up a new action, which I'm going to call edit a to-do. I'm going to trigger this action based on when a component is actually clicked on within the application. Now, the same way that we had the same way that we set up our delete workflow. With our delete workflow, we had an input variable that we set within the system. So we're going to do this exact same process here, where we're going to add, and this is going to be called the ID to update. So this is the actual ID of the record that we're updating, and this is going to be a number field here. And we're going to press Save Changes on that, and we're going to save our overall workflow, and then start adding events to it. So the first event we're going to add is going to be the run endpoint event. Which endpoint do we want to run? We want to run the edit a to-do endpoint. We're going to get a response code, which is endpoint response code for edit a to-do, something like that. We've got here a body variable that's been set. So this is equal the name field that needs to be set on our endpoint. So this is going to be equal to the variable in our front end, which is going to be, we could use the same one as we used before, which was the single to do here. That should be okay, I think. So it's going to use that here and press OK. Then our path variable here that's going to be set. This path variable is going to be equal to the variable that we created in our workflow, so the ID to update, and press OK there and save down here. So that's equal to this ID to update. So our path variable here is equal to our ID to update here. Then the second thing we want to do on this particular workflow is we want to then also add the option to get the data so we can see any updates that we've made. So if I pick here the run an action, we can run the get all to-dos that we made in the first tutorial, and that's going to run that whole workflow all the way through and press save. So now we're calling this endpoint, we're sending this endpoint an ID to update, and also we're sending it the variable single to do, which we're then assigning to this settings box here. So that should be good for now. So I'll press save on here. What I'm then going to do is I'm going to go over to the design page up here. And on this screen here, I'm just going to add the components that we need in order to actually enter this information. So probably what we're going to need is we're going to need to have an input box in here where the user can actually input some information. And if we go back to our div block here, we can have a button at the end of the div block like so. If we grab this text input, we can give it the input box class that we have up here. And I'm just going to set that to the same purple color that we have for our button up here. I think that's the same purple color. Yeah, that's the same purple color. It's just the white makes it look a bit different. And we can just double click on this and call it edit to do, like so. So this now is going to do, edit to do, and edit to do. So now we've set up a place for our input variable to come from, so where they're going to actually edit the to do from. What we could also do, maybe just to make it look slightly nicer again, is we could just give a slight bit more space above, so maybe 10 pixels, 20 pixels, just move it down the page a little bit. So we've got a place now where the user can enter in this text input, but what information are they going to enter? Well, it's going to be, it needs to be bound to an input variable. So the input variable that we're going to bind this to is going to be the variable single to do. So if we press OK on that, that's going to bind our single to do variable that we made in the second part of this series. And in fact, if you click on this text input, you can see we're using the same variable here. So this information here is going to get sent to our endpoint on our back end over here when we click this edit to do button. That's what the goal is. So if we pick this edit to do button here and we go over to the workflow tab, what we can do is we can add a workflow to this. So the trigger is going to be an on click event, and we're going to say on click we want to edit a to do in the back end, and we're going to say from here we want which edit to do we want to edit. Well, we want to edit this row here of information. So we're going to have to write that little formula again, which was row dot ID in here like that. Press the OK button. So now when this button here is clicked, it's going to take the variable that we've bound to this text input box, which is our single to-do record, and it's going to send that record along with the input variable row.id to our workflow, exactly the same way that we did for the delete. So the ID to update is then going to be set equal to that row.id field, so it's going to be the ID of the record we want to update, and then it's going to send that information, all that information, so the ID and also the single to do, over to our endpoint, which is going to call the action, which is going to update the record in our database. So we've now built that full workflow out, and what we can do then is if we save this page by pressing the file and the save button, we can then regenerate the code for our application. So this is going to be test full workflow on the comment, and press the generate code. Exactly the same way as in all the other times you press that button, we're now regenerating the full stack code. So again, the front end is building in the React and Redux frameworks. Once that's been built, we're going to press the preview button up here. So in a second, now that's built, we're going to press the preview button, and we've got our to-do app here. So if we want to now test that this is able to edit, we've got buy a burger and chips. Let's say let's change that to walk the dog, and we press edit to do. Now we can see that edits in here. So we've now given our application several bits of functionality. We've given the option to add an example to do in here, so you can add that to do to your list. You can now edit that example to do, so editing to do by pressing the edit to do button, and we can also delete that whole this whole block, this to do, by pressing the delete button there. So that completes this particular tutorial where we've shown you how to build endpoints to get data, to add new data, to delete data, and to edit data. We've shown you how to build up the corresponding actions for those endpoints. We've shown you how to create a database and how to put data into that database. And we've shown you briefly how to set up front-end workflows in order to allow your application to be interactive. So I hope that was helpful. Please let me know in the comments below if anything didn't make sense, and I'll try and get back to you as quickly as I can. And we'll be making more of these tutorial series in the next couple of weeks, which will just showcase more of the Dittofi application design studio, just to show you kind of more, I guess, deeper levels of functionality to build more complex applications out of the system. Thank you very much for listening, and hopefully see you again soon.